Hello, everybody. We're back again. So I've got Jeremy and Jay with me. How are you guys?
How are we?
I'm good.
Yeah, really good.
That's good. So what we're talking about tonight, I know we've got something in mind, but who wants to talk about it first?
Sure thing. Well, we were originally going to talk about poltergeists, and then we thought, well, it's a very limited sort of subject and topic. So we thought we'd go in and talk about the types of hauntings, different types of hauntings.
Yeah, we can talk about poltergeist through that as well.
Oh, yeah, poltergeist is definitely an activity. But yes, it makes it a bit easier having a vast collection that we can talk about.
It's even better when you got personal experience, though. I've had personal experience with poltergeists and a few other different types.
Myself, I haven't. Did you want to go into your poltergeist experience?
Oh, there's a couple of them. The biggest one I'll tell you about, which I'll talk about a bit later on. But and that one ties into probably several different types of hauntings all at once. But the first one we actually had was back. We got contacted by a family that were having issues at their house, and we go through the usual vetting process, which we always did through WAPA. We still do, and that's to go through several phone interviews with them, just to try and work out if they are legit and stuff like that. And then we actually came to the conclusion that they were legit, and because they were people of religion, I was able to get in contact with Father Barry May, who's sadly passed away now, but he was the local Perth exorcist, and he was more than happy to come out and help out and do his sort of thing. Now, he turned around to us and said, we're not allowed to enter the property at all. He said we had to wait out the front for him to arrive, and then he arrived. He had a chat with us all, blessed us all, and things like that. And then we proceeded through, and we did our questioning and stuff. And then Father Barry May, he did what he did. He talked about his things. He had a look around the house, and I don't know if it's a thing of religion or anything like that, but everything that a lot of us, especially us three, would think are normal in a house, he'd say that they're sort of occult objects which can bring in the demonic, which is a religious term. I don't like using that term, as you all know. But he said they can foster that kind of activity. And what they were talking about, this family, it actually wasn't far away from Adventure World. And they were talking about things getting thrown around the house. So your typical poltergeist type activity, and loud bangs, you'd hear things happening through the night and stuff like that. Now, I didn't actually, as part of this interview, expect to witness it myself, but right in the middle of when Father Barry May was talking to him, whatever it was not happy about it, and I saw a glass fly off a table and smash. Now, I'm not talking about slide across the top of a table. I actually saw it lift up. Now, me being the skeptical sort of minded person, if I see something sliding across the table, you're checking for things like condensation, or if somebody's got magnets underneath it, all those sort of things. Definitely none of that. And this thing, it flew. It lifted and flew, and I saw it start to finish. In fact, we all saw it. So that was my first encounter with the poltergeist, and it was an interesting one. But after that, everybody knows about Albany. We've done Albany a few times, and we've even done a show on. We did a show when we were down there actually, and many years ago when I was down there, we had a crew that we were investigating, and I stayed in what apparently was a doctor's room at the isolation hospital, and one of the other guys was supposed to stay in the room on the opposite side, and then there was supposed to be people that were going to stay in the two rooms of the isolation hospital itself. Now, I don't even know where to begin with this, but it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, so it was in that typical hour where most people say the demonic and all those sort of things happen. And I was sort of awoken out of my sleep, and the darkness, you know when your eyes adjust and you wake up and you can sort of just vaguely make out bits and pieces. Well, in the corner of the room, it went blacker than the blackest black you can think of. And then I could actually see my breath. And I thought, yeah, this is not right. Not here in Australia. That stuff doesn't happen unless it's in the middle of winter, and this was not in the middle of winter. So I actually unzipped me sleeping bag, and I got out because we slept with the clothes on and stuff like that. And I went towards the door, and something actually grabbed my the neck chain that I had, because I had a couple of like protection charms and they didn't work for shit, to tell you the truth. It actually pulled me back and slammed me down. And I'm a big guy, so it takes a lot to do that. I then got up, ran to the door, which was about 3 steps. I did it pretty much in 1 step. Opened the door, a glass flew at me, and a broom flew at me. So it was targeting me. And I went run around to the other side, which one of our old investigators was supposed to be in the other room. I found out he wasn't there. He got too nervous through the night. He chickened out and he went to crash over at the nurses' quarters. So I was literally isolated in the isolation hospital. So
I suppose going into that, then yes, you got your poltergeist activity, but then would you have that as like your interactive sort of intelligent activity?
Oh, whatever it was,
or
it
would
didn't
you put
like
that
me.
more but the demonic sort of entity?
I don't. You know me. I don't like using that word.
I know you don't, but there's no other way really to ask that question.
Well, it is going to get mentioned tonight because just because of what it is, it's a very common word in this field. So
we could call it angry activity if you like.
No, you see, demonic for me is a lot more spiritual and it's a lot more aggressive. This was just an angry spirit, which I guess the very German term is, angry, noisy spirit, which is poltergeist. So I would not classify that one as anything other than a poltergeist.
So what about last time we're at Albany when we had something else happen in the...
that was something completely
different.
Would
that be demonic? Or would that be unhappy?
That would be edging closer to what you might call demonic. I don't know if I'd quite go there, but it's certainly edging close towards it. Yeah.
It was definitely unhappy.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So, poltergeist, so that's just normally what? Throwing things, noises, bangs, sort of playful but not playful?
Yeah.
There's other cases like where it stacks furniture and stuff like that. It's not actually throwing things, like they'll stack furniture or they'll move things into one spot in the room, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, a misconception with things like the poltergeist, everybody thinks about those things that you guys just mentioned, and yes, that is definitely the case, but it even means lots of bangs and thuds. I mean, audible to your own ears, not just something that you pick up on a voice recorder or something like that. Actual, you can hear walls banging and things like that. They technically come under the poltergeist thing.
Well, I'm pretty sure it is poltergeist is the German word for noisy spirits.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And yeah, you just got to take it in its literal term.
All right.
So no, it's good. But yeah, other things. Oh crap! There's so many different types of hauntings these days. I don't think you can put people term everything as a ghost or a spirit, but I don't think every haunting is a ghost or a spirit. Like we were talking about earlier, there are many, many, many different categories that hauntings fall under.
Well, we won't even scratch the surface.
Not in half an hour, no.
Do you remember that one? Yeah, do you remember that one, Gary? The investigation we did at the quarantine station up here? Yep. And I actually did a lone vigil inside the crematorium furnace.
Yes.
And I was closed in there, and I was the only one in the building. Everyone else was outside.
Yeah.
I actually had like the black shoes that I wear to an investigation. I've always had the same ones. They were tied up in a double knot and have been since the day I bought them. I've never undone that. I've always left them in a double knot. I just slip them on, slip them off.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was in the furnace itself, I felt something tugging at my foot. At the same time, I was hearing like clawing marks down the brickwork on the inside of the furnace, like fingernails running down the brickwork.
I remember that night well.
And I yelled out to the guys that were outside, my wife being one of them, and asked them if anyone was underneath the furnace, touching my foot or something. They went, no, we're nowhere near it. And when I got out of the furnace, when they let me back out, one of my shoes was completely undone.
When I let him back out.
So
I would have left him in there.
Would that class as poltergeist, as well as like an intelligent thing, because it kept recalling me every night for about a week and a half in my dream state.
That short answer, yes.
I'd
Because
say it'd be the intelligent interactive.
it is,
Yeah.
but as soon as anything physical moves, so the fact that your laces were tied, untied, whatever, that's a physical thing. That falls under the category of a poltergeist thing. What happened after that? Because I know you were a bit.
I wasn't myself for about
You
a
weren't
week.
yourself for a few days. No, that might have been something a little bit different. And the other thing as well is, I don't think a specific spirit is just automatically a poltergeist or a this or a that. I think any spirit, if they get powerful enough, can produce poltergeist activity. It's just a matter of if they can get there.
Well, I've actually read it in some articles where they class poltergeist activity as a kinetic energy, where the spirit can manifest things using other energies around them to draw in power, and that's how they do things.
Another thing with the poltergeist as well is it's tied into prepubescent girls. They reckon
I
that
did read
because
that.
of the changes that they go through physiologically, they reckon that can produce that much energy that quite often, if there's poltergeist activity, there's usually a girl in that age range somewhere around. And that's they've actually done actual studies into that. So the fact that they're actually doing studies into it means that there's enough there for them to consider the variables.
Yeah.
I don't know what they are, but
No, well, there's not a lot really you read on it, but obviously they're getting their papers from somewhere.
a lot of these people do a lot of study. I mean, there's a film that came out in the 80s, and obviously being our show, it's not one of our shows unless we mention a movie of some sort in here. It's a show called The Entity. Now, if you haven't seen that, it's a film from the 80s. I recommend watching it. It's not an easy watch. It's a pretty bare bones type show. It's a made for TV type show. It's not a high end type show, but it's based on a real case. And it started off with a family, little things happening, and it escalated to the point where the kids were attacked. The lady's son, the poltergeist, actually broke his arm in an attack, and batters and bruises. And it got to the point where allegedly she was being sexually assaulted by the spirit in quite severe ways. Now, you could say that's leading more towards like a incubus or a succubus type thing, but this was just bare bones poltergeist. It was beyond spiritual is what happened to her, and it's a really interesting case because what happened was a local university heard about it all, and they ended up sending people out, and it blew them away to the point where they went into a full experiment stage of actually trying to catch a poltergeist. And I don't know how you would look at it, but it involved dry ice and all this and all of that. And it's an interesting show. It's called The Entity, back from the 80s. It's definitely worth watching.
Was this before or after Ghostbusters?
Before.
No, I just meant it in the sense of they're trying to catch ghosts. I didn't know if they got the idea from that or...
No. It's
not ghosts, but poltergeists, yeah.
No, this actually happened. This actually happened. Yep. A bit like The Conjuring or the Enfield Poltergeist or, Amityville. Amityville's a questionable one, but you know what I mean? All of these, the Haunting in Connecticut, that was another big one. It was a true story, and when you watch it at the end, they actually bring up on the screen all the words and they tell you what's happening now, and even to the point where the movie was made, which is obviously several years later, the lady is still periodically being attacked by this thing. It followed them. They moved house a few times, and it actually found them. So that's a scary thing about it.
So it's actually attached to the people.
I don't know if it's attached to the people, but it certainly knows how to find their energy and find them, which opens up a whole different kettle of fish. You have attachments, and then you've got basically stalkers,
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing, that.
Yes, I mean, like most people don't see it. Like you talk about, a ghost or a spirit tied to someone or something, and generally it's like unfinished business or emotional connection, or they don't realize they've died yet. But you don't really hear many people saying about, it's stalking, it's doing all the negative things. Normally people bring up more of the positive sort of happy-go-lucky vibes.
Yeah. And, I mean, we're only just talking about that. You've got other cases like shadow people. I don't know what you would call them. They don't actually physically interact, but just the sheer presence and usually the size of those things can be very, very, very intimidating to people. And we've dealt with a couple of cases with shadow people.
Well, that is another one I had written down for the types of hauntings was shadow people or shadow creatures.
Yeah,
and their activity.
I don't know what you would class them as. Sometimes they're just a black mass, but more often than not, the ones that we've dealt with have been very human in form. There was a case that we had to look into, a house that was haunted, and this was a 160-year-old house up in the hills. And what happens is the young family bought the house, and what they've done is they started adding to the back of it, and that's when it all started. And they ended up getting in contact with us to see if we can come out and help out. Now, we had probably 10 K2 meters with us at that point, and she told us where, like, the room, because she was heavily pregnant at the time, the room that they were setting up at the front was going to be the nursery. Now, their main bedroom's at the back, so I don't know how that works, but they had the cot set up in the room with them as well, because they weren't far off, And the two areas are where all the sightings of this shadow person was. And she described it as about a 6.5 foot, 7 foot man with a big hat on. It was like a big long coat, but it was just all silhouetted, And we were there. I mean, we never saw anything physically like that, but we did start picking up energy fluctuations and things like that. And we actually set these K2s up at about 1.5 meter increments from the back room down the hallway. It went around the kitchen and through the dining room into the front room where they were setting up the baby's nursery. And when it started, you'd see the K2s light up and then it stopped. The next one would light up and stop, and the next one. You could literally trace the path that this spirit was taking. Now, it went obviously the way through the house. I suppose it could have gone through a wall, but it didn't. It followed around because we could actually track it on the K2s, and we actually did have that on video. And that was a very, very, very goosebumpy night, that one.
So on a case with the shadow people, you could use something like your dots grid and stuff like that with the lasers that would help sort of pick up the same sort of thing?
That's what the laser grid was originally invented for, because the idea behind that is any discrepancy, any sort of mass moving through the field, you would see reaction on the laser dots. And we didn't have a laser grid at that point in time because this was quite a while ago. But we ended up doing a clearing. We did have a psychic at the time who was good at doing clearings. And I stayed in contact with that family for probably 3-4 years after that. And they didn't have any more issues. And last I heard, I think they've got a second baby now, and I think they're possibly planning a third.
Wow.
So
So with the shadow people, you're saying about like they're wearing a big hat. I know another one of them is.
Oh, this
like
was
a
that
hooded-
case. That was that case.
Yeah, yeah. So generally they say there's what, two types of shadow people or figures. Generally one that looks like it's wearing a hat and one sort of like a hooded. In a generalization. But they're commonly known to look at the ground, from what I've found out.
See, if you look at Waverley Hills, they've got a thing up
Yep.
on the 5th floor called the Creeper.
Yes.
That is just a big black mass that
Blob.
moves around
Like a
that,
mist.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
a mist. That would still be classed as a shadow
See,
person, even though it's not a person shape.
because I know you don't like the word, and it's going to say this constantly, but with your demonic hauntings, it's a lots of mention of dark mists, big shadows, the smells, and everything else. Where's the differentiation between that and shadow people?
Well, that's the whole thing about this whole field, is drawing that line. I mean, if you want to take it to that next step, what's the line between a person who is being spiritually influenced by something demonic, or somebody who is, for lack of a better term, batshit crazy?
Well, it generally depends if there's people with white coats.
No, not always. Not always. I'm not allowed to say who or things like that, but I know somebody that works in the field, and they know that quite often a lot of these people, they reckon are actually...
I think I might know this person.
yeah.
But yes, I can agree 110% that they're probably not batshit crazy and they're seeing
Not
things.
all of them. I mean, some of them definitely are, but...
yeah.
And it's probably not the best term to use, but it is our show. So,
Oh, okay. A few crayons short of a full packet.
yes.
So, well, while we're on it, do you have any additions to demonic activity? If you like to call it that.
I've been a part of 3 exorcisms myself.
Yep.
Not actually involved in them, but documenting them and stuff. One was for Father Barry May, and there was another one for a person who was having issues, and they had somebody local helping. And again, it was in a documentary style. I was recording the whole thing. And the third one was actually up, I think it was out Clarkson Way, somewhere like that. And it was a family that were having a lot of issues, and they had a spiritual healer come all the way out from Sydney, and they asked me, they always seem to contact me, to see if I could, again, document it for them and give them all the footage, because they were going to make the show about it all. And I never saw what happened to that, or even if it got made. But what I find interesting is each one of them was a completely different scenario. When Father Barry May was doing it, while it's not a full-blown Catholic type exorcism that you would see in the movies, it was a religious a ritual, I suppose. And then the other 2 were a lot more spiritual. And I've got to be very careful how I say these things, because I don't want to step on any sort of privacy or confidentiality things. But the one in Clarkson was a lady, and she would have been probably 5'4", something like that, maybe 50, 60 kilos. And her voice changed, so I can vouch for that. Luckily for me, there was no projectile vomit involved, because if anybody projectile vomited in me, I'd do the same thing straight back at them. Yeah. But at one point there, she started to get aggressive, and it took... Now, Jay knows a couple of the guys that would have been with me that night, and we were all big blokes, and it took 4 of us to hold this 50-kilo lady down. It sounds wrong, I know that, but just keeping her pinned to a seat so that they could continue the exorcism. Now, this exorcism started at 6 o'clock at night, and I think we were still it took it in shifts, and it wore out for a while, and she came back for a little bit, but then you could see the signs that it was starting again. So it was round 2, round 3, round 4. And it was about 3-4 o'clock in the morning when I tagged out, and I said, I've got an hour and a half's drive back home, so I've got to get out,
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened after that. I know he had to come back 2 more times, and at that point I said, you've got your footage. I've seen more than I would care to see, because a lot of the stuff that you see in The Exorcist is obviously all special effects and done to make it
Hollywood.
look appealing for movies and things like that. But when you hear, for example, when you hear a woman's voice
sort of go like that.
without a little button to push, I mean, it wasn't quite as deep as that, but it almost sounded like there was actually 3 voices in there, 3 or 4 voices in there, all talking at the same time. And I was like, yeah. And he kept saying, all of them kept saying, you don't look them in the eye. Just, and I go, well, this person's talking with bloody triple voices.
Well, I suppose they say your eyes are your portal to your soul.
Yeah, that's it. So, like I said, I think there is something to it. I won't ever say it's a religious thing to me, and you guys know exactly what I'm going to say, and that is that I think, and I'm probably going to make a few people upset by saying this.
Doesn't matter.
But I believe that all the different religions are different versions of the same facts. Like, certain things happened and different people wrote them down in their books slightly differently, and this is one religion. Yeah, and that's another one, and that, because they all talk about floods, they all talk about demons, they all talk about angels. The only difference is the Quran. Everything's called the jinn.
Yes.
So you've got the good jinn, you've got the bad jinn. Normal, like Catholics and stuff, you've got angels, you've got demons. They're the same things. You've got good energies, you've got bad energies, and the bad energies are really bad.
See, that's another thing though. I grew up in church for 16 years, brought up through it, and they'll always say there's a God and there's demons and then there's a devil, but yet they won't mention or talk about anything in between.
No.
So if it's someone influenced by a spirit, it's no, that's demonic possession or that's demonic influence. It's like they don't have that separation and variations in between.
Because do you know what's in the middle?
It's frustrating.
But do you know what's in the middle?
Good and,
Hey?
I was just going to say good and evil. There never is one without the other.
Exactly.
No, but do you know what is in the middle? This is what I'm saying. And I'm not going to refer to a certain movie, but you've got a little devil on one side, Animal House. You've got a little devil on one side and a little angel on the other side, both influencing you. And that's exactly what they do. Demons aren't supposed to be able to physically, unless you fully accept them in, which is, I can't remember the correct term, if it's pure possession or willful possession. There is a term for it. Once you accept them in, they can go to town, and that's where all this other stuff starts happening. But beyond that, it's influence. They can make you feel like you're crazy because constant voices in your head and things like that. And quite often when you hear people, the DeFeo, Ronald DeFeo, he heard voices and stuff like that. It could be schizophrenia or several other different psychological issues. It could be something demonic, but it's a scary one, and you've got to be very careful how you approach it, because if something happens to somebody while you're trying to treat them or deal with them, who's liable in that situation? Because at the end of the day, who can prove demonic possession? You first of all, to be possessed by something demonic, you've got to be able to prove that the demonic is actually real.
Yes.
Actually, the last case of The Conjuring is a good example of that.
Which one?
When that young fella killed bloke, and then he was put in jail, and then they had to try and prove he wasn't in control of himself.
It's true. It's true.
See, I I was reading a little bit about just quickly before we started recording about the demonic activity. Now, they also stated in that, and it sounds weird to think of it like this, but after you think of it outside the box, it kind of makes sense, is when Einstein said that E equals mc squared, which is energy can be converted into matter, and matter into energy. Now, if demons are pure energy entities, can that not then work with that formula?
They're not energy, and they're not energy
They're not?
entities. No.
So what would it fall under?
Oh God, what's
If they're not, no, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm doing to put you on the spot.
No. It just gets so complicated because
It does.
The idea is, and this goes into another thing which I have dealt with again in Albany. It's almost like a multiverse theory kind of thing. This one, because you're talking dimensions and there's a multitude of different dimensions and things like that, which have been actually scientifically proven that they could exist. They haven't actually proven that they do exist, but the mathematical equations say, yes, it is possible. And what's not to say that demons aren't just some sort of hell is just another dimension. And when you go into like the Big Bang Theory and things like that, one of the things they say is it splits off and the universe, multiverse, whatever you want to say, is continually expanding and contracting, right? In, out. Now, if you think of each universe as a bubble, right? Sometimes bubbles come together, and at that point there, it's the closest they're ever going to be. Now, when we were in Albany the first time, way back, we did a board session, and we actually made contact with a lady who was a nurse, and she actually was freaked out because she looked at us and thought we were spirits. And I can't remember what year it was now, but we actually got a date out of her. And when we researched it later on, that's when stories of poltergeist, that ghostly activity started around there. And I don't know, where I'm going with that is, if a demonic realm gets so close, it's almost like they can reach out and influence really easily. Mm-hmm. It's not an actual energy inside more of our universe, but it's stretching, if you know what I mean. It's pushing its way in.
So it's more like a
influence,
an entity that's never had mortal or human form.
Yeah, not in our realm. In their realm, yes, but not in ours. Yeah,
like a bubble within a bubble.
A bubble beside a bubble.
But then, what if you get the bubble that joins the bubble into one bubble?
That's when the shit works out, and that's what. And in all honesty, you think about it. Going back to the Bible, possible. They talk about the rapture and things like that. Maybe that's when those bubbles collide.
Yeah, but they've also been saying the rapture is going to happen for the last 30 years.
We're talking about a book that
has had that many interpretations.
I'm not going to say anything because I can get myself into trouble again.
Look, Gary, I'm going to say it's a great storybook.
Yeah. Well,
because it realistically is. It's a book in front of books.
Again, I'm not going to make any friends.
Inside books.
I'm not going to make any friends with. I've read better. But
So previously touching on, you're saying with the exorcisms and not looking into eyes, and I brought up about the portals to the soul.
Do you want me to tell you
Have
something?
You guys heard? Pardon?
We've gone over our time already.
Yeah, I know. That's fine.
We'll keep going.
One last one.
Yeah.
Have you heard much to do with portal hauntings?
No.
I think that'd be a very similar sort of thing.
As in the dimensions?
Well, you talk about portals. Portals are actually theoretically a doorway between dimensions or between point A and point B. So it comes down to that same thing. If there's that point in time and space where that veil, I suppose, which is what they say around Halloween, the veil is at its thinnest on Halloween. Yeah. What's not to say that some things couldn't break through? Mm-hmm. I mean, I know you can't prove it, and all the law around demons and things like that is that they can only influence, they can't actually physically do anything. But one of the things they can do is, once you accept a demon in and it becomes like a pure possession, they can take control of your body and they can do all sorts. Then they're not physically here, but they've psychically taken control of you're basically a remote control person. They're controlling you. You know what I mean? Have you seen that show, The Last of Us?
No, I haven't.
No.
Similar sort of thing. That what they call the cordyceps fungus or whatever it is. It actually burrows into the brain of the ants, and it controls them and sends them back into the colony, so that it can infect other ants and it can keep progressing and growing. And what's not to say that demons aren't just a different version of that?
Yeah. So okay, sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. Mental blank.
Oh, he hasn't quite. Jay, your turn.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see why it couldn't be like that. I mean, like any virus, it has to have a host to be able to manifest into something else to go to someone else.
Yeah.
So why couldn't a demonic thing do the same thing? Once it takes over one person, then it's got power to move forward and go to another one.
Well, that's what they do say they do. They can jump from person to person in the movies, but they do say it can jump between family members and stuff. But see, now I'm catching what Jeremy just said, because I had something I was going to say and I just totally washed right out of my mind.
I just had a brain fart and can't remember what I was going to get to. With you're saying with the bubbles being close to other bubbles and being able to jump and reach out and affect in that way. Do you think the ley lines would have a lot to do with that?
Magnetic fields.
That's the Earth's energy lines and stuff like that. Now, you, me, everybody that's involved in the paranormal knows that to have any kind of reasonable activity, you need an energy source to fuel the activity. Like the investigation that we did last weekend,
amazing.
That had some really good, and for everybody who doesn't know about it, you will get to see that because we did record it all, and it could be up very soon. But yeah, with that, we actually had a thunderstorm, so that energized everything, and we got some ridiculous results out of that. It was a very successful night as far as we're concerned. To answer your question, ley lines are just the energy lines of the Earth. So I would always say that, and I always have said that, if your activity along the ley lines is always going to be more powerful, and where you get intersecting ley lines is where you're going to get really powerful things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's like double dipping on the energy bank when you cross them over.
Yeah.
Never cross the streams.
Oh, God, he said it.
I was biting my tongue and it hurt a lot, but do you have any other additions you want to make to reasonable additions you'd like to make to hauntings?
There's all sorts. I mean,
that they've missed.
We didn't even touch on residual hauntings or any of that kind of thing.
No. That's just something that loops of time.
No,
we could do. We could always do a part 2.
It is a possibility, but one of the things that I've been doing this for over 40 years, so I've formed lots of theories. Proving them is another thing, but I have got lots of theories now. You think back to the 80s, we all, well, maybe not Jeremy, but we remember the 80s. And remember the old magnetic tapes? You used to put them in and you'd record the top 40 on a Sunday night or whatever it was, and you had your tapes and whatever. Now, they use they use lead or whatever they would use, zinc. They use all sorts of different sort of metals and things like that. Now, you go back 100 years or so, wallpaper wasn't really a big thing. There was some around, but people would paint, and they used to use the heavy metals in the paint back then.
Lead-based paints.
Yeah. And what would happen is if something very significant happened, it's almost like hitting the record button and it's recorded into the metal in the paint. And then think later on, storm or something, because you know how all the old films, the ghosts come out when there's a storm and stuff. Well, you think about it, that's lifting the energy levels up to the point where it's like pressing play, and you might get the same thing again. Now, what happens is, and I know this is the case for me, when I'm redecorating, I don't strip the paint, I just paint straight over it. It's like recording over your magnetic tape. Eventually, what's underneath comes through. And the more you paint over it, the more muffled it gets. But those first... Yeah, and when you see the ghosts and they start becoming more transparent and more transparent, it's because you're sort of doing away with it. Now, you don't hear so much about residual hauntings in this day and age because heavy metals have gone from the paints, and most places have been renoed to the, to the max. So I think you're going to find that residual hauntings are going to basically be a thing of the past. You know what I mean?
With residual hauntings as well, can't they also occur from something traumatic or stressful that's happened?
That's exactly that's what I'm saying. Something traumatic happens, and there's that much energy released in that moment that it impregnates itself into the base metals in the paint. If you know what I mean, it's like hitting the record button. That's what I'm saying. And
so then can it like 180 and have a whole heap of good stuff happen and have good residual hauntings? I know that really sounds weird now, say it out loud, but
I just don't think...
For a positive as such, not good, but positive.
I don't think when you're happy, it's as traumatic as... You know what I mean? I think it's the trauma energy of it all that does it. But I know what you're saying. The
only reason I'm asking is I read a small part where it actually said that residual hauntings can happen with positivity, being there's a whole heap released at one point. Now, I don't know enough about it to say yes, no,
See,
maybe.
Now I can tell you one thing now, right? If that was the case, every teenage boy would be reading their little Playboys and they'd be positivitying themselves all over the walls, hoping that they're going to see it all come to life.
Is that why?
And I don't think that's happened yet.
Is that why Jay's so happy in the room that he's in at the moment?
Well, he's got very white walls.
Not happy.
Anyway, we're at 43 minutes of our 30-minute show, so I think we better call it for tonight.
No worries.
No, righty. Or righty. See, it's in the brain now.
What?
Or righty.
I've behaved tonight, and you're the one that's going off.
Actually, yes, I'm very proud of you, Jay. You did really well tonight. Anyway, I think we better say good night, guys.
No worries. Good night.
Roger that. Later on.
Take it easy, peeps.